Oh no.
Welcome back to Inverted Aviators RC. Today I am super excited to formally introduce the F4U Corsair from EFlite. I am super excited to fly this plane a whole bunch, and it is super cool to get it all the way into the air, but unfortunately we didn't receive this plane in this perfect flying manner. In fact, there's quite a few things wrong with it. So this video is not going to be a how-to, it's going to be a how I went about fixing this plane, because I know my techniques aren't perfect. But if you have no idea how to go about fixing a plane, this is at least what I did. And if you're watching this thinking, why would he ever do it that way? Let me know, because I'm always open to finding new techniques and fixing what I currently do. So just let me know how I could do it better. So here's a quick overview of all the tools that I'm going to use to fix up this Corsair. Starting with a hot glue gun, this will probably be the most important because it is the easiest to fuse together broken pieces of foam with a little bit of hot glue. In order to reinforce this hot glue, I've got some toothpicks as well as some bamboo skewers. Depending on how big the pieces are, we're going to need either a lot or a little bit of support. Like for fixing this little tail piece, we're just going to need a little toothpick, but for the aileron or for a bigger part, we're going to use a bamboo skewer. And then to reattach the rudder hinge, I've got these nice nylon hinges that are pretty large. Obviously, they will be linked in the description, but they will help keep the rudder intact. And any hinges that you'll need fixing, these are the way to go. We also have just an assortment of tools, screwdrivers, different little clippers, tweezers, X-Acto knife, just the normal things that you'll need on a fix. Got them right here. They'll also be linked. And then lastly, paper clips and a lighter. These will be used together to heat up the paper clip, and then the heated paper clip melts through foam really easily. So when we're inserting either a toothpick or a hinge, it's nice to just make a very clean cut with the heated up paper clip. So let's get into the build. Taking the wing off is actually really easy. There's only 4 screws that you have to go through. I circled them here on the screen, but after you take those screws out, you should be able to pull the wing off, but first you got to flip it over and remove all of the plugs from the receiver, because those are actually keeping the wing attached as well. So after you take those plugs out, the wing should just pull out through this little hole where you can pull the wires through, and you should be good to go. So the first part that I'm going to try to fix up is this rudder piece. As you can see, it's not only completely separated, so we're going to need some nylon hinges, but there's also a chunk of the rudder that goes up, around, and back and attaches on here, and I don't have that piece at all. So I'm going to try to fashion some foam board pieces in to remake this shape, and I'll do that with some, like I said, foam board and packaging tape and some probably bamboo skewers. But let's see. I'm going to give you guys an update here once I figure out what the procedure is going to be. All right, the first part we're going to do is reattach this little tiny part of the vertical stabilizer, which will go right on the top here. And we're going to do that with the heated paper clip, toothpick, and the lighter technique. Now, this technique does use a lighter, so be careful. This is my warning. I'll probably give many throughout the video, but please just be careful when you're using these lighters. But the way to do this is you take a paper clip and you unwind it until you got a straight line. Doesn't have to be perfect, but long enough that you can hold onto a part without having your fingers be too close to this part at the end. So the idea is you heat up this end of the paper clip, insert it straight into this this first tail part, and sink it in just a little bit. We don't want to go through the edges, but once it's wide enough, we can then glue in a toothpick, and then we'll do the same procedure on the plane, and then we can glue it all together, and it should be really strong. So I'm going to start out by heating up this end of the paper clip. Doesn't need to be anything special, but just heating up the paper clip. So you can see it sinks just right into there really easily. And so that went in a little ways, that far. We'll probably go a little bit further just so we get a little extra of the toothpick actually helping out. So let's just keep heating up. All right. So we now have a hole that goes quite a ways in, and as you can see, you can then push the toothpick in quite a ways as well. And we are just going to attach this onto the plane. So we're trying to get this as straight as possible because we want to sink this straight into the plane. So we're just going to maneuver it just a little bit until you can see it is pretty straight up and down. Now we're going to line it up on the plane. So I'm going to move the camera up here. So what we're going to do is do the same procedure up here so that when we sink this all the way in, it'll be super strong. So we're going to figure out right where we need to line this up. So as you can see, we need to be right about there. So I'm just going to make a slight pilot hole so that I can put the paper clip into. So once again, we're going to heat up this paper clip. I'm going to be careful not to burn myself or the plane or anything else. Find that pilot hole, just sink it in. So now, if we look at it, we've got this that goes in quite a ways, and you can take a look to make sure we're not accidentally pushing out the sides, but we've got it pretty darn close. You can see I misshot it a little bit, but we can just go back and fit in the toothpick just so that it's perfectly lined up. So I'm going to pull it back out, heat up the toothpick again, or heat up the paper clip, and try to get this right, or all the way correct. Here we go. And just like that, it looks pretty close to normal. So all I've got to do now is add a little hot glue to all these different components, and then we should have this vertical stabilizer fixed up. And so applying the hot glue is really, really easy. All we're going to do is take out the toothpick, apply a little hot glue onto this hole, and then insert the toothpick, making sure we can spin it on the way in to make sure all parts of this toothpick gets hot glue on it. And then apply some hot glue into the hole on the part we're attaching. And then just connect the pieces together. Put a little on the inside too, just to make sure everything is stuck in really well. And then just fit it together. And you can wipe away any excess with a Kleenex or a piece of extra foam, but hold it in place and let it set. And we're going to start with the biggest issue that we have right now is that this rudder, which is completely busted and broken off. So we're going to start by taking it off of that linkage arm and then filing away all of the little debris and things that are in the way so we have a really clean, smooth surface to work with. So I'm just taking a X-Acto knife and just shaving away. I'm being very careful not to cut towards myself or cut towards a finger, but as you can see, I'm just getting rid of the shavings with the goal being a really smooth, uniform surface that I can eventually use nylon hinges to glue it back together. And I'm also cutting this at the top. It was kind of ripped off, and what I want is a very, very smooth surface, so when I eventually re-glue the top part back on, it's a really easy surface to add in some bamboo skewers and some popsicle sticks. But I'm making it as smooth as possible, as you can see there, which is really nice. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the plane side, just getting rid of all the little scraps and all the things that will get in the way of the nylon hinges. Now, like most of this won't be a perfect science, but it's just more of getting a feel for how you want your plane to go back together. And in my mind, two very smooth surfaces working together will make sure that this joint works the best in the future. As you can see now, once I line them back up, they're fitting a lot smoother, and the line across the top is super straight, so that when I eventually put that top part on, it'll be a lot easier to create that part. So now I'm going to reconnect it with the linkage arm so I know exactly where the rudder is going to sit once it's connected all up. And by doing this, I can make the part on top a little bit better. So I'm marking it with a pencil, and then I'm putting some painter's tape to trace these lines. Now, in hindsight, I could have just used a ruler to mark it, but in the moment, I was like, oh, painter's tape is awesome, so let's just do that. So yeah, I made these lines straight across so I know where I should put in the nylon hinges, or at least where I think they should go, because there's no perfect place, or there's no perfect way to fix this up. But in my mind, add some painter's tape and then some nylon hinges, and scoop, there they are. And so the strategy for getting these nylon hinges from out to inside the plane is the same heated paper clip and meshing it into the foam. And so I bent it to see exactly how much of the paper clip I need to go into the foam. Then I'm heating it up, and then I'm going to make some more pilot holes on either side of the foam for each of the hinges. You can see I go in there once, and then after I go out, it'll be on the other side, and then I'm going to go in afterwards with an X-Acto knife and then cut in the full length of those hinges. And as you can see in just a moment here, I will mark off where the ends of it will go, and then I will take an X-Acto knife after heating it up once again to then insert the hinge. And similar to how I use the paper clip to kind of measure the exact depth that I want, I use the hinge to make the X-Acto knife the exact depth that I want, so I don't accidentally cut way too far into this rudder, because there's no real reason to cut it super deep, because at the end of the day I do want to be gluing these hinges in, and there's just no reason to cut extra hinge out. So as you can see, these hinges will slide in, and you might have to wiggle it a little bit, but the whole goal is that you still have the metal hinge pin outside of both foam sides, so that when it is swinging, there's no foam that is coming into contact with it. But I just go back through and try to smooth it out a little bit until I get one hinge all the way in there looking good, and I'll give it a little test here to make sure it wiggles nice. And then I'm going to repeat the exact same process with the other hinge. I didn't show it just because it's exactly the same thing. But now that you have two hinges in, you want to make sure that both hinge pins line up. And that way there won't be any added friction when you're moving this control surface with the servo. And so I'm going to go put it back on the plane. As you can see, I am going to measure out the exact distances, because I am going to have to cut the same holes in the plane side of it. So I'm taking my pencil and I'm marking it, and don't mind the weird grip I've got. I don't know why I'm doing it like that, but I'm marking the top and bottom of each of the hinge holes, and then I'm going with the X-Acto knife, cutting out those hinges. That way you can just transfer the marks from the rudder to the plane without having to guesstimate and make a whole bunch of extra cuts, and it kind of speeds up the process a little bit. And once I'm confident that I made big enough cuts, I can slide the broken rudder back into these new rudder holes, and I can confirm that they are going both into the plane and into the rudder. And right now I'm just double checking that everything is looking nice, and I can slide the rudder on and mess up a few times, but then once we get it in, we can test that everything swings freely and is working really well. So I'm going to once again clean up and make sure that surface from rudder to plane is completely smooth, and there's no extra little bits of foam that are going to get in the way of this new piece that we're going to add. And then we're going to actually make this piece that we're going to add, because the rudder does go up above that top blue part, and has a really cool shape to it. And so I wanted to replicate that. So I'm going to start by cutting out a chunk of foam out of foam board, and then measuring it and creating my own little design. It won't be perfect, but it'll be pretty darn good. So I'm using painter's tape once again to tape it onto the rudder. And if you have better ideas of how to do this, please let me know. This was kind of hacky, but I'm going to then use a ruler to trace the back edge of the rudder, as you'll see in just a second, as I guess I'm looking for my ruler. There we go. But I'm going to trace it up, because I know that's the exact line that I want coming from the back of the rudder. I'm going to repeat that same process for the front, because I want the front edge. And then I'm going to lightly trace out what I think this little bulb on the top is going to be. And in just a second, I'll get the top part, and then I'm going to cut out this foam top of the rudder. And I won't show cutting out, but it's just taking an X-Acto knife and cutting foam. Pretty straightforward on that side. But as you can see here, I will cut it out, and I'll actually make 3 of them. Why 3? That's actually because the rudder is thicker than one piece of foam. So if I cut 3 out and then hot glue them together, which is what I'm doing right now, I'll be able to kind of file and shape these foam pieces to not only be the right thickness, but also to follow the contours of the rudder, or at least what the rudder would have looked like if it was still the original piece. So I am scoring the foam, which means taking an X-Acto knife and lightly scraping and then gluing together. I also removed the paper, I should add. The very middlemost piece of foam has the paper removed on both sides and then lightly scored. and then just gluing them back together, applying a very high amount of hot glue, and then pressing them together. I put them under a few textbooks. But you see I'm kind of squeezing them together, and then we will see, yep, it is looking good. And make sure to take a little piece of foam to smooth out and get rid of all of the extra foam or the extra glue that might squeeze out as you're doing this process, because if you use way too much hot glue like I did, a lot will be squeezing out. As you can see right there, I'm using my finger, which, believe it or not, is hot, as the name hot glue suggests. As I mentioned earlier, I want to shape and kind of cut this rudder into the right contours, and I'm doing that by getting this blue part and tracing the shape that the rudder on the part of the rudder on the plane is, or I guess this is the vertical stabilizer, but I'm tracing what that shape is, and then I'm going to transfer that shape onto our glued together rudder piece that we just made. So you see I'm cutting it out, and I'm going to tape it onto the front of the rudder, and then I'm going to use an X-Acto knife and some sandpaper to kind of file away. Now, something I did that I don't know if I showed or not, but I folded back the paper on this rudder so that when I'm done, I can glue it back. And that way it just looks a little cleaner. But I think I'll get into that a little bit later. But as you can see, I'm just trying to shape this foam into the shape of the vertical stabilizer in order to just give it that better feel, and hopefully makes it a little bit more aerodynamic. From the flight afterwards, it worked just fine. I don't know how much this helps, but it does make it look a lot nicer, and it gives it that more put together feel. But after fiddling around with it for quite a while, you can just, it looks good. You can even look from the front straight back on the plane and say, well, does the vertical stabilizer kind of match? If so, great. Oh, there you go. Yeah, I'm pulling back the foam, or excuse me, I'm pulling back the paper to expose the foam so I can cut out the foam and kind of bring it back to a point. And this is just, again, look on the plane, see what the current rudder looks like and like what the point on the back of the rudder is, and try to shave it down. So this is the technique using the X-Acto knife. It's a little difficult to get the right angle and get the right depth and the right cuts all the way across the foam. And in a second, I'll use a piece of sandpaper, which worked really, really well, to kind of get everything really uniform and scrape it down and get it down to a point. So I will repeat this process on the other side of this rudder, and then we will glue it all down. So again, sandpaper, really, really helpful. And there we go, peeling back the other side, and we're just going to cut into it. As you can see, those cross hatchings, that was the scoring that I did to the middle and the outer pieces of a rudder, which allows you to glue it together and make the pieces adhere a lot better. So now you can see I've got this wedge shape, and I'm going to take off this painter's tape because I no longer need the shape of the vertical stabilizer on the rudder. And we're going to hot glue down these pieces of paper to give it that really strong and structured look. So put again, a very high amount of hot glue, and I'm using a piece of foam or even a ruler would work to flatten down the paper on the outside and a little on the corner. And this makes it look a lot more put together, mostly because I don't know how to put vinyl or whatever that thing is you can put on foam to make it look really nice. I'm just using the paper that was given. So that might save you a little bit of extra money too if you don't want to go out and get a new wrap for your plane. But after pinching it all together and using a little more hot glue and even just using your fingers to kind of pinch it down to a point at the end, you will get a rudder piece that looks really well. And you even have enough space on the bottom to add in some barbecue skewers and some toothpicks, as you'll see in just a minute. After shaving it down a little bit more to fit the right shape, I realized it is going to have to swivel and it can't be all the way thick. So I kind of round out this edge piece that is going to be pretty much touching the vertical stabilizer. And so I round it into a, using the sandpaper to kind of round it out and get it uniform all the way up and down this rudder. As you can see, it works really well. You can even swing it in and out, and everything seems to line up really well. So I'm adding, yet again, a little more hot glue to kind of pinch it down to a point. And this is, again, the idea to not only strengthen it, but also to make it look a little bit better, because I want it to match what the current rudder comes to a point. I wanted to match it as much as possible. So I'm using some bamboo skewers, and you can kind of measure out, this is how far I want it to go into the rudder. So I'm cutting it down and just launch that as far as you can. And then using your whittling skills, make a point that is way shorter than you really wanted it to be, but that's all right. And then we're going to use, once again, the heated up paper clip technique, and I'm going to mark, this is about where I want it, because that's not right where the rudder attaches and where it doesn't, or where I want it to not hit on the vertical stabilizer side. So as you can see, there's a little area that won't attach to the rudder. So I'm just whittling it down, making it as smooth as possible, which again, this is probably unnecessary, but if you want to get it as close as you can to before the crash, this is just what I did. A little more sandpaper just to kind of smooth things out, and we should be ready to get this thing all glued up. And so we're going to start with taking the rudder off so we can glue in these bamboo skewers. As you can see, here is the heated up paper clip. Same technique as before, nothing new, just heating it up, poking a hole in it, and make sure that you're giving enough space for this bamboo skewer and the nylon hinges, because I just realized, that hole will not allow these hinges to go in. So I just make a second hole. No big deal, it's just a little hole in the foam. So I'm going to repeat the process, heat up the paper clip, sink it in a little bit further out of the way so that everything can be fit in just fine. As you can see, works just as well as before. And we're going to make another pilot hole and then sink in the top of the rudder all the way, and bam, we have a more working rudder. And so next comes the hot gluing it all together, or actually a toothpick. Yeah, that's right. We're going to add in a toothpick, which is not another bamboo skewer, because as the rudder tapers off at the end, a bamboo skewer would just be way too big, and we wouldn't want to accidentally poke through this nice blue color that we got. So I added in a toothpick, and now once we pull it all apart, we can add some hot glue and get it back all assembled. And this is the easy part, which is pretty much gunking it all up with a whole lot of hot glue, put it into the pilot holes where the bamboo skewer and the popsicle, or not the popsicles, the toothpick will go, and then gunking it up with even more of the hot glue, and then wiping it away with either a piece of foam or some tissues. But either way, just sink it together and you'll have a really, really strong rudder, which is awesome because this plane is pretty cool with all the rudder authority you can have. And then just going back and gluing in these hinges, pretty much the same. You just add a little bit. You don't need a whole lot, like I added way too much. You just need a little bit of hot glue near the front to kind of wiggle it in, and then make sure you can still bend these nylon hinges without any of the hot glue getting in the way. So as it's drying, make sure to just wiggle it a whole bunch. I did it even more off camera, but just wiggle it so that the hinge is still movable as the hot glue is drying. And I'm even picking away at some of the hot glue that I accidentally put way too much in, so that once again it moves freely. And so just repeat the same process with the other hinge, because you want both hinges moving as freely as possible. And this is the proper amount. One little dot on each side of these hinges will be more than enough. You don't need to gob it up like I did on the first hinge. A technique to know is when to use a whole ton of hot glue and when to use a tiny bit. When you're attaching two very big pieces of foam, use a lot of hot glue. When you're attaching very small nylon hinges that need precise movements, don't use a whole lot of hot glue. Fun fact, didn't know that. So once again, using just a little bit of hot glue to put these rudder hinges into the vertical stabilizer, and they should just sink right in. And then make sure to move it all around to make sure that the rudder is completely free and moving, and that should be the rudder all good to go. And one last tip for any control surface that you're fixing with hot glue and nylon hinges, make sure you get a full range of motion. Bend it all back and forth, make sure everything is moving well before you get into the air, because it would be really lame to have to come back and refix it after another crash. In order to fix the elevator in this case, it's going to be exactly like we did with the top of the vertical stabilizer as well as with the rudder. We are just going to use the toothpick and the heated paper clip method. As you can see, I'd say, yeah, this probably two will fit in just nice. But since this is just foam on foam, all we have to do is heat up a paper clip, sink it in, and repeat the process for the other hole that's going to be used for the toothpick, and pop it in. It's really, really simple. Now, one thing I'm going to do here that you shouldn't do is put in too much toothpick into the plane. And I'm thinking, well, let's just use the entire toothpick because why not? But in the case of this elevator, it's actually really, really skinny, or at least there's not a whole lot of foam to be digging in. As you can see, as I put this into the plane itself, I am going to poke through this really nice blue coating that I really didn't want to do. And it's not a huge deal. It's only a matter of looks. Its plane itself will fly just fine. But if you want to use the entire toothpick, make sure to put more than enough of the paper clip in. make a little bit extra space with a paper clip, which will allow the toothpick to sink in a lot better. And as you can see right here, and bang, right through. And that's because also my angle wasn't great, which means I was going a little too steep, which caused it to poke out the top. But I was like, I'll double down, we'll just poke a hole in it, no big deal. So just something to keep in mind if you're trying to make it as good as possible. Be very careful and be very slow with all your procedures, because it just takes 1 second and then you have a hole from a toothpick, which is nothing more than really annoying. So after dealing with all this sadness that comes with poking through the plane, I moved on and just kept with the process of putting the toothpicks in, putting some hot glue in, and making the elevator back to normal. So I'll just let you watch through it. It's everything that you've already seen. And then for fixing this little part of the, I guess is the horizontal stabilizer, I'm guessing, let me know if I'm wrong, is the same as adding on a rudder. Is pretty much I wanted to trace the shape that this little chunk is missing out of 2 pieces of foam. And the reason I'm doing 2 instead of 3 is because I just don't need that extra thickness that comes with 3. But tracing it out and then cutting out 2 of these shapes, gluing them together using peeling the paper back, then scoring the foam, and then using hot glue to glue them together, then putting them under some textbooks or something really heavy in order so they can adhere properly. And it's the exact same technique, which happens all the time in the RC hobby, is that you'll learn how to do something one way and then you'll realize that you can apply that same technique over and over and over again, which is really handy. But yeah, it's very simple and it makes it look a lot nicer. And one thing that I learned from this fixing the plane project is sandpaper works really, really well for shaping and kind of angling and getting foam into the proper shapes that you want. So it looks like I've got maybe 220 grit sandpaper, but any really sandpaper should work. And then if you take the paper off, you can kind of shape it down to the exact size of that horizontal stabilizer. And in the end, it works really well and it looks nice, and it may make the plane a little more aerodynamic, which makes it fly a little bit better. So all of these little fixes will in the end help your plane in the long term. And if you've made it this far into the video and you think we deserve it, we'd really appreciate a like and a subscribe, because it really helps our channel grow. And we really love making these videos and flying these planes once they're eventually all put back together. But yeah, let us know if there's anything we can do better in these fixing up planes videos, and let's just get back into it, because once again, it's a whole lot of fun. Now, it wouldn't be an Inverted Aviators video if you didn't add some sort of really small camera onto a plane in a pretty cable management friendly kind of way. So we've got the Wolf Whoop WT03 camera here, and I'm demonstrating right now that this camera comes with a wire connector, and if you connect that wire connector to a servo lead, you can actually get power and ground from a servo. And that's exactly what I did here. So you can power this plane from a Y lead coming from one of your channels. I think I put it on gear, or just put it on a channel that it won't matter if you lose it. Not that you ever will with this camera, but if you Y lead it to the gear, it'll be perfect for adding a little bit of power. So once again, I've got the heated up paper clip technique, which I made a small hole until I realized that this hole is going to be a lot bigger in order to fit the FPV camera wire all the way through. So I go through a lot of iterations of making this hole bigger. I start with a toothpick and I just put it through, wiggle it around, try to spread out the hole a little bit so that it fits the adapter from the cord that comes with the camera. Figured out that's not at all going to work, so then I went to a bamboo skewer, made it a little bit wider. I figured, hey, maybe that'll fit. Turns out not even close. So then in a minute here, I'll try twisting it and kind of wiggling it and doing anything I can to widen the hole without like wrecking the foam, because the whole idea is to make it look nice with a camera, not just cut a massive hole for no reason. So I'm going to twist it in from the bottom side, maybe put the adapter through. No, it doesn't work. I get a screwdriver, which is even bigger than the bamboo skewer, twisting it in, kind of wiggling it around a little bit more. Anything I can do to make this hole bigger. I spin the whole thing around the screwdriver. Eventually I go back to the heated up paper clip method to, again, make the hole wider and even cauterize the hole a little bit, because when this foam melts and then cools back down, it's kind of a hardened layer around. So I'm using that technique to not only widen it out, but then the foam won't grab this adapter as much, so I can kind of poke it through even further with this bamboo skewer. And then from the other side, I'm going to use a tweezers and then pull the adapter up and through. And this whole idea is that the camera can sit on the top without obstructing anything too much. As you can see, there we go, adapter is finally through. And so the idea is to put this camera right in this little rectangular cutout that you can see. So I have some double-sided tape, which I cut to the exact size of this rectangular cutout, and then taking off the sticker, I add 2 more pieces of double-sided tape on either side, because as I just showed, this battery hatch is curved and I don't want the camera to be sitting on a curve. Rather, if I cut these little strips of double-sided tape, I can have the camera sit flat so that both edges are touching these little additions of double-sided tape, and then the middle should be touching that first side. So this is the same technique that we've used on the Evos and the Crescendo, and I'm pretty sure most of the planes have some sort of curved surface that we're putting this camera on. But as you can see now, the camera will sit perfectly straight on this curved surface, which makes the viewing experience a whole lot better. So all that's left is connecting the camera wire to the adapter and then pulling this cord through. As you can see, in the end, you get a really, really clean look, because all of the wire will be inside the plane, and the only thing that's left is just a little bit of wire going from the camera down through that pilot hole. And that's pretty much it. Just make sure as you're reassembling it to get all the wires together, and be careful when putting them back through this hole on the body of the plane that you're not accidentally pulling any of the wires too hard or crimping them. But as you pull it through, you can kind of nestle the plane in, and then there's once again just 4 screws on the bottom that are pretty easy to get to. And so if you carefully flip the plane over, yeah, we just have 4 more screws to put in and we should be good to go. And as we plug in the wires back into the receiver, it will be in the normal throttle, aileron, elevator, rudder, and then flaps and gear can either go on 5 or 6. But as you can see here, I'm taking the gear receiver port and putting a Y lead on it so that one of the Y leads can go to the camera. So then I'm going to go back to putting all of the different ports back into the receiver in that same configuration I just talked about, which is you can look up in the manual, or if you have it specific to a different receiver. But since I'm using a Spectrum receiver, Spectrum has that TAER and then flaps, gear, and then your safe goes on a channel that's actually higher than 6, but that's for a different video. But as you can see here, a nice close-up on my arm to show how strong I am for putting in all these receiver ports. But then we can attach the camera, and you will be able to receive power. And you'll see in just a minute as we take off into the air, it works really, really well. Yes, you read that right. We have had custom stickers made from our logo, and they look so, so cool. But yeah, I'm putting 2 on the rudder, 1 on each side. And if you're curious about them, reach out in our Discord or reach out to our email, and we can hook you guys up with some of your own custom stickers. But they look awesome, and we're super excited to add them onto all of our planes. And just like for building techniques, as you watch this flight, let me know what I can do better, because this is my first Warbird, and From what I learned, you're supposed to apply some back elevator in order to make it more controllable on the ground, but I think I did too much because it kind of ballooned. It was kind of, I don't know what word would really describe it that well.
Give it more power so it stops stalling. From the ground.
Looks good.
Yeah.
A little wibbly wobbly, but
Yeah, I know what that's all. Little wibbly wobbly.
Maybe weebly wobbly, but it was super fun to fly. And as you can see, once it gets into the air, the view is really nice. You don't get too much nose in the camera. You can still see the prop spinning, which I think is really cool. But having the first person view on the Corsair, well, I guess this isn't quite first person because this is from the nose, although it is a goal of ours to move the camera back into the cockpit. Wouldn't that be awesome? That's in the list of things that we're going to do. But just like all other flying videos, these Wolf-Up cameras work really well at a medium range, even pretty long range, and they're just super fun to fly. And you're probably noticing, why is he keep putting the gear in? Well, actually, one of the gears does work and one is completely broken and the wires are actually came off, so I can only put one of the gears in. I figured it might make it easier to fly with both the gears down instead of one up, one down. But don't worry, I have ordered a new set of gears and I'm really excited to put them in because I think the retracting gears are super cool.
oh wow. Yeah.
I'm going to do a pass of when I do want to land. I'll try to do. So I'll go the opposite direction. It's real smooth though.
Yeah, it looked more wibbly wobbly at the beginning, but not so much anymore.
Yeah, kinda. Let's see, I'm gonna fly higher and then turn on safe and AS3X and see how it.
And it wouldn't, again, be an Inverted Aviators video without a little bit of the Inverted Aviators special. A nice inverted flight there. And this is on a 4-cell battery. I don't have the throws all the way to the max, or at least on the ailerons, or on all of the control surfaces. I think I can move it even more flippy, which I will absolutely do at some point because this is super fun. But yeah, let me know how I could fly this better. I know that for warbirds, you've got to keep the power as high as you can. I think I've already said that I've got to trade altitude for airspeed when it comes to landing, which is a technique I still need to perfect. But I know it doesn't fly like an Evo or Crescendo because I can be very aggressive on the throttle without doing too much, but this thing does climb really well, which is really cool. But just getting more flights under my belt is probably my best strategy for flying this plane better. And yeah, it's so cool to fly, and this is the second time I've flown a big plane, so it's a little more nervy, but still super, super fun.
That's what I gotta do to land. I gotta trade airspeed, or no, altitude for airspeed, and then you can level off. Okay, I'm gonna try to.
And as this flight draws into a close, there's actually going to be a part 2 on how to fix up this Corsair. And you might be thinking, well, why? Doesn't this plane look awesome? It's flying as exactly as how it should be. But yeah, there's still a few more things to fix. Some things that you won't actually see quite yet. But yeah, stick around. There will be more things. I won't, hint too much at what it could be, but yeah, we'll see what the fix will be. But thank you so much for watching. Stick around for more videos on this F4U 1.2 meter plane from EFlite. It's been super fun to fix, and we can't wait to fly it a little more in the future. Thanks for watching.